What's going on? Good afternoon, everybody, on this beautiful Saturday, July the 22nd of 2023. So make sure you guys hit the channel, subscribe, like, and share the channel. Today, I'll be talking about James Forman and the Black Manifesto. So the whole idea of the Black Manifesto, right, was basically deal with the focus on reparation from the white church, okay, and black revolutionary. So James Forman himself was the one that gave the speech on May 15th of 1969 in Detroit, Michigan. Okay. So I'm going to share all that information with you guys, but let's look at who James Forman was. So let's go into a little bit about his history, and then we're going to go into the idea about the Black Manifesto. All right, so James Forman was born October the 4th, 1928, and was a prominent African American leader in the civil rights movement. He was active in Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Black Panther Party, and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. As the executive secretary of SNCC from 1961 to 1966, Forman played a significant role in the Freedom Rides, the Albany Movement, and the Birmingham Campaign and the Selma to Montgomery marches. So after the 1960s, Forman spent the rest of his adult life organizing Black people around issues of social and economic equality. He also taught at American University and other major institution. He wrote several books documenting his experience within the movement and his evolving political philosophy, including Sammy Young Jr., the first Black college student to die in the Black Liberation Movement in 1969, The Making of Black Revolutionaries, and Self-Determination and Examination of the Question and its Application to African American People that came out in 1984. So the New York Times called him a civil rights pioneer who brought a fiercely revolutionary vision and masterly organizational skills to virtually every major civil rights battleground in the 1960s. So before I continue, right, there's going to be a lot of subjects in around Black revolutionaries, right, and civil rights movement, because in the 60s and the 70s it was a lot of civil rights organization, so it was a lot of Black movements going on during that time period. So Black people were very actively involved in focusing on the common goals and the common interests of the people. Okay. So those who make arguments saying that, well, our ancestors didn't do enough, our people didn't do enough for us, well, you gotta go back and study into the civil rights movement and see exactly what they were trying to do. They were really putting their lives on the line. They were really putting up a major fight. They were really tackling the issues and going at the politicians about various things. However, again, by the government system that we live in, right, it deals with policies, plan, and practice. Okay? So we can't sit here and say nobody did anything or try to put forth effort into doing something, because the plan was there. People did something. But again, you gotta look at your government. Oh, wait. Okay. So it says Foreman was born on October the 4th, 1928 in Chicago, Illinois. As an 11-month-old baby, he was sent to live with his grandmother, Mama Jane, on her farm in Marshall County, Mississippi. He was raised in a dirt poor environment. It was not uncommon for him to eat dirt because it was believed to have some nutritional value. In his autobiography, he called eating dirt a staple of his diet. He recalls being hungry all the time. His family had no outhouse and no electricity. They used leaves, newspaper, and corncob for toilet paper, and they used twigs as toothbrushes. Despite these things, Forman claimed to have never questioned his poverty and did not understand it at the time. His aunt Thelma once caught James reading a shopping catalog in the dark. She being a school teacher, took an interest in accelerating James' studying and gave him lessons at home. James credited his upbringing for his eventual success, saying his grandmother gave him a sense for justice while his aunt gave him his intellectual fire. Right? So it goes on to talk about James' first experience with lynching came when a white man showed up on his doorstep, asking for food and asking that they not tell anyone where he was. The next day, news spread that a white man had been lynched, although Forman never learned why. When Forman was around the age of 6, he had his first experience of racial segregation. While visiting an aunt in Tennessee, Forman attempted to buy a Coca-Cola from a local drugstore. He was told that if he wanted to buy one, that he would have to drink it in the back and not on the counter. And he was confused. He asked why. And he was told that, boy, you a nigger. This was the first time in his life he realized that because of the color of his skin, that there were things he could and could not do. And other people had the right to tell him what he could and could not do. All right, so basically growing up as a kid, right, you don't know the idea of racism. You never encounter racism. Okay, racism doesn't necessarily exist in your world. So therefore, you will never know what it's like to go through that until as you get older, you'll start dealing with the social construct and the ideal of it. All right. So many children don't know what racism is. They don't know what it looks like. So until they deal with the social construct, and that's the case with James Forman. And not only it was a social construct, it happened to be political as well, right? He was told that if he wanted to buy one, that he would have to drink it in the back and not at the counter. And it says in the summer of 1935, Forman moved to Chicago to live with his mother and stepfather. That September, he enrolled in St. Anselm Catholic Church or Catholic school, his first official schooling, and was immediately put into the second grade. He adjusted to his new life in Chicago fairly well. When playing with the neighborhood kids, he would throw rocks and cans at white pedestrians and threw bricks off of roofs and onto police cars. And he was a little badass little boy. He was something else. He was bad, but he had that fire in him. He had that fire of a revolutionary. However, his new school put a lot of pressure on him to convert to Catholicism with his Protestantism, right? So with his Protestantism becoming a great issue by the 6th grade, being the only Protestant at an all-Catholic school put James through great emotional turmoil. He decided to transfer to a local public school, the Betsy Ross Grammar School. He did so well there that he was allowed to skip the first semester of the 7th grade. All right. So it says from the age of 7 onward, James earned a small amount from selling issues of the Chicago Defender. He would often read these papers, which helped develop a strong sense of protest. He read the works of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois and was heavily influenced by Du Bois. He called Washington an apologist and often quoted Du Bois and his call for advancing blacks through education. He had yet to enter high school, but for James, the race issue was on my mind, before my eyes, and in my blood. All right, so it goes on to talk about after he finished his primary education, he enrolled in Inglewood Technical Prep Academy. All right. Oh, so let's go down here. It says he started his high school career by taking vocational courses instead of the general pre-college coursework. This led to a poor performance and eventually a suspension from school. He was sent to a continuation school, Washburn High. He got a job as a paper roller at Sentinel Press and joined a gang known as 61st Raiders. His gang activity was very limited in scope, and he said he thought using drugs was a waste of time. Around the age of 14, James Forman, who had been going under the name of James Rufus, found out that his stepfather was not his real father happening upon his own birth certificate. His real father was a cab driver that Foreman coincidentally met and introduced himself to while working at his stepfather's gas station. What a way to meet your parent. Let's just go down. Let's skip down. All right. So let's go down where it says national organization with SNCC. So in 1961, Foreman joined the newly formed Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. From 1961 to 1966, Foreman, a decade older and a more experienced than most of the other members of SNCC, became responsible for providing organizational support to the young, loosely affiliated activists by paying bills, radically expanding the institutional staff, and planning the logistic for programs. Under the leadership of Forman and others, SNCC became an important political player at the height of the civil rights movement. Okay, so SNCC, as an affiliate of another direct action group of the movement, Martin Luther King Jr. So the Christian Leadership Conference, at times, Foreman's more confrontational and radical style of activism clashed with King's Christian pacifist approach. All right. So in August of 1961, Foreman was jailed with other freedom fighters protesting segregated facility in Monroe, North Carolina. This episode brought him into contact with Robert F. Williams, who won Foreman's admiration. During a visit to Williams' home in Monroe, Foreman discussed the positive role of using armed self-defense in the struggle against white oppression. After his sentence was suspended, Foreman agreed to become the executive secretary of SNCC. And so it goes on to say that he gave criticism of Foreman's occasional criticism of Dr. King was not simply a political exercise, but reflected a genuine concern about the direction King was leading the movement in. He specifically questioned King's top-down leadership style, which he saw as undermining the development of local grassroots movement. For example, following W.G. Anderson's invitation to King to join the Albany movement, Foreman criticized the move because he felt much harm could be done by interjecting the Messiah complex. He recognized that King's presence would detract from rather than intensify the focus on local people's leadership in the movement. Foreman echoed the concern of those in SNCC and the broader civil rights movement who saw the potential dangers of relying too heavily upon one dynamic leader. All right, so in the interview with Robert Penn Warren for the book Who Speaks for the Negro, Foreman laid out many of his ideologies concerning SNCC, commenting that it is the one movement in this country that has within its spheres of activity rooms for intellectual. All right, so go down to talk about the ill-fated relationship with the Black Panther Party. So in May of 1966, Foreman was replaced by Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, who was determined to keep the SNCC together. But Foreman recalls male leaders fighting for her attempt as executive secretary to impose a sense of organizational responsibility and self-discipline, and trying to justify themselves by the fact that their critic was a woman. So in October 1967, Smith Robert was to die of exhaustion, according to one of her co-workers, destroyed by the movement. All right. So replacing John Lewis as chairman in May of 1966 was the 24-year-old Stokely Carmichael. When on the night of June 16, 1966, following protests at the shooting of solo freedom marcher James Merritt, Carmichael walked out of jail and into Broad Street Park in Greenwood, Mississippi. He asked the waiting crowd, "What do you want?" They roared back, "Black Power, Black Power." With Carmichael, the Atlanta leadership was increasingly persuaded by the case Foreman had made for a Black political party. Like Foreman, who was now urging the study of Marxism, Carmichael hesitated to accept the implication that whites should be excluded from the movement. But this was the course taken in December 1966. The SNCC national executive asked white co-worker and volunteers to leave, and in May of 1967 told them to resign. So it goes on to talk about his Black Manifesto work, which I am going to get into. But just a little bit, it says as a part of his Black Manifesto on a Sunday morning in May of 1969, Forman interrupted services at New York's Riverside Church to demand $500 million in reparation from white churches to make up for injustice African Americans had suffered over the centuries. All right. So later on in his life, he completed a graduate work at Cornell University in African American Studies, and in 1982, he received a PhD from the Union of Experimental College and Universities in cooperation with the Institution for Policy Studies. Okay, so he spent most of his adult life organizing Black and disfranchised people around issues of progressive economic and social development and equality. He also taught at American University in Washington, D.C. All right. He passed away at the age of 76 of colon cancer at Washington House, a hospice in Washington, D.C. So it goes on to talk about his personal life. He was married to Mary Forman and Mildred Thompson. In divorce, he was married to Mildred Thompson Forman, now Mildred Page, from 1959 to 1965. During the most active period of SNCC, Mildred Forman moved to Atlanta with James and worked at the Atlanta SNCC office, as well as working as coordinator for tours of the Freedom Singers. So during the 1960s and 1970s, Forman lived with Constancia Dinky Romilly, the second and only surviving child of the British-born journalist, anti-fascist activist, and aristocrat, the Honorable Jessica Mitford, and her first husband, Esmond Romilly, who was a nephew by marriage of Sir Winston Churchill. Though obituaries and other prominent articles about Forman have stated that he and Romilly were married, correspondence between Romilly's mother and aunt state that the couple were not legally husband and wife. So Forman and Romilly had two sons, Shaka Forman and James Forman Jr., who is a professor at Yale Law School. So then it goes on to say that he, in his autobiography, The Making of the Black Revolutionary, Forman devoted an entire chapter to explain his atheism. He believed that belief in God hurts my people. He also received the African American Humanist Award in 1994. All right. So that's pretty much his life as a revolutionary. Let me see. Okay. So that's pretty much James Forman life. Now let's get into the concept about the Black Manifesto. All right, so here's an article from the empiricalalarchives.org. The Church Awakens African Americans and the Struggle for Justice, right? And going on down here says the external stakeholders exploited internal division to place their agenda before the convention. So the Black Economic Development Conference, an organization promoting Black independence, published the Black Manifesto, which demanded reparation to African American. The BEDC grew out of a national conference of the same name held in Detroit, Michigan on April 26th of 1969. James Forman became the spokesperson of BEDIC, and the Black Manifesto became its platform. The BEDIC asked for $500 million in reparation from white churches and synagogues and said the monies would be used for 9 projects. Among those projects outlined were a Black university, a communication system, and a Southern land bank. By July of 1969, the BEDIC movement was solidified and organizing, the group filed for incorporation in the state of New York and elected officers to serve the organization. Among the officers was Muhammad Kenyatta, who was elected administrative vice chairman. The spokesman for the manifesto, James Forman, was never an officer of the Bedi. When Bishop Himes met with the author of Black Manifesto and appeared to consider donating funds to the Bedi, many church leaders felt a line had been crossed and were outraged. All right, so see if I can pull this document up. So here's a document right here about the Black Manifesto. Okay, so this was his speech. And it says, we, the Black people, assembled in Detroit, Michigan for the National Black Economic Development Conference are fully aware that we have been forced to come together because racist white America has exploited our resources, our mind, our bodies, our labor. For centuries, we have been forced to live as colonized people inside the United States, victimized by the most vicious racist system in the world. We have helped to build the most industrial country in the world. We are therefore demanding of the white Christian churches and Jewish synagogue, which are part and parcel of the system of capitalism, that they begin to pay reparation to Black people in this country. We are demanding $500 million from the Christian white churches and the Jewish synagogues. This total comes to $15 per nigger. This is a low estimate from we maintain there are probably more than 30 million Black people in this country. $15 a nigger is not a large sum of money, and we know that the churches and synagogues have a tremendous wealth and its membership. White America has profit and still exploiting Black people. We are also not unaware that the exploitation of colored people around the world is aided and abetted by the white Christian churches and synagogues. This demand for $500 million is not an idle resolution or empty words. $15 for every Black brother and sister in the United States is only a beginning of the reparation due us as people who have been exploited and degraded, brutalized, killed, and persecuted. Underneath all this exploitation, the racism of this country has produced a psychological effect upon us that we are beginning to shake off. We are no longer afraid to demand our full rights as a people in this decadent society. So he goes on to say, we are demanding $500 million to be spent in the following ways. One, we call for the establishment of a Southern land bank to help our brothers and sisters who have to leave their land because of racist pressure for people who want to establish cooperative farms but who have no funds. We have seen too many farmers evicted from their homes because they have dared to defy the white racism of this country. We need money for land. We must fight for massive sums of money for this Southern land bank. We call for $200 million to implement this program. And it says, two, we call for the establishment of the four major publishing and printing industries in the United States to be funded with $10 million each. These publishing houses are to be located in Detroit, Atlanta, Los Angeles, and New York. They will help to generate capital for further cooperative investment in the Black community, provide jobs, and alternative to the whites dominated and controlled printing field. And it goes on to say, we call for the establishment of four of the most advanced scientific and futuristic audiovisual networks to be located in Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, and Washington, D.C. These TV networks will provide an alternative to the racist propaganda that fills the current television networks. Each of these TV networks will be funded by $10 million each. Four, we call for a research skills center which will provide research on the problems of Black people. This center must be funded with no less than $30 million. And it says, five, that was four. Okay, five is we call for the establishment of a training center for the teaching of skills in community organization, photography, movie making, television making, and repair, radio building, repair, and all other skills needed to communication. This training center shall be funded with no less than $10 million. And six, we recognize the role of the National Welfare Rights Organization, and we intend to work with them. We call for $10 million to assist in the organization of welfare recipients. We want to organize the welfare workers in this country so that they may demand more money from the government and better administration of the welfare system of this country. Seven, we call for $20 million to establish a national black labor strike and defense fund. This is necessary for the protection of black workers and their families who are fighting racist working condition in this country. All right. So go on. It says nine. We call for the establishment of Black University to be funded with $130 million to be located in the South, and negotiations are presently underway with a Southern university. 10, we demand that IFCO allocate all unused funds in the planning budget to implement the demands of this conference. All right, so not to go any further, so basically, his whole agenda, right, with the $500 million is basically going towards political and economic education and build institution for African Americans and be able to make sure that African Americans have resources to access, right? And so that was his whole agenda and his whole purpose here, according to his manifesto. All right. Now it sounds all familiar, don't it? Because that's the current state that you have some so-called black organization. Their whole thing is for reparation. Now they not saying they need $500 million, and they ain't going to the church and the Jewish synagogue about that. They going to the government about it. They basically want the same thing. But the whole purpose of me showing this video, right, is that for years our people been putting up fight for reparation for a long time. And reparation is not something new. After slavery, our people was fighting for reparation, and one of the reparation was 40 acres and a mule. That was the reparation. Okay? Right? Then you had the civil rights movement. They was putting up a fight for reparation. You had the what's it called? The New Republic of Africa. Right? The Republic of New Africa, they was fighting for reparation. John Conyers, the late John Conyers, who was a Democratic, what was he? He was a Democratic. I forgot his position just that fast. But yeah, he was in the House of Representatives. Yeah, he was in the House of Representatives. Now Sheila Jackson took over his spot. But in 1989, he has worked alongside with the Republic of New Africa, which Queen Mother Moore was a part of. And that's where they put the whole idea of the HR 40, which deals with reparation in itself. So every year they host an event like that every single year. And with James Forman doing the Black Manifesto, he put up a fight for reparations. So the whole intended purpose is to show that black people been fighting for reparation for the long period of time. And we never got it. We never got it from these white churches, the synagogues. We never got it from the government. Now the question becomes, are we going to ever get it in this lifetime? More than likely, no. Now, would it happen 100 years from now? Maybe 200 years? Maybe. It could be a possibility, but in this lifetime, no. And see, this is the part about it. It's the tricky part. When you're dealing with the government system, right? It's going to cater to who it want to cater to. So it depends on who in the position of power and what their whole agenda is. So this is one of the reasons why if we vote for politicians, we have to know what are their agendas. What is the whole purpose? Because if they do not have agenda in mind to bring some form of reparation or to bring some form of, bring some type of compensation for workers or union or anything like that, then that's when we have to make our decision as a people that, okay, we should not put you in office. Yeah, you might be a Democrat or you might be an independent party or Republican or whatever you want to identify yourself as, but you don't have an agenda that help or cater to working class people. And also, I feel like the people are not holding these politicians accountable to anything. They just allow them to get away with that. They'll feel good rhetoric at that and allow them to do whatever they want to without even putting them on the spot for the things they are not doing. So yeah, again, the fight for reparation is going to continue for a long time. It's going to be around until black people get what they deserve in this country, or what we deserve, right? As far as lineage wise, and as far as being a people of those who were enslaved, you know what I mean? And I'm not just talking about just in the United States, but just in general, because we gotta understand slavery was not just a United States business, it was a global commodity. Okay, it was an international business. That's what slavery was. It was an international business. So of course our people gonna continue to put up a fight for that because we gotta get what is due to us. You know what I'm saying? I mean, especially by the fact that we are the descendant of those who was enslaved. And our people was pretty much laboring for free and suffer all type of, dealt with all type of degeneracy and all this health issues and whatnot. So our people got to get what is due to them. They didn't get what was due to them during that time period. So it's only logical to put up the fight. But we also know that the reality of someone getting reparation is less likely to happen in its current lifetime as well. It's a dirty game out here. It's a dirty game. Politics is real dirty. So what we got to know is no matter what we do, no matter where we go, there's going to always be politics. And it's not just politics in government, but politics in general. That's going to always be the politics. But anyways, thank you guys for watching my channel. So with that being said, this your girl Tiffany and I'm finna log off. So peace and power be to all of you. And until next time, I will come back with more videos and more subjects to talk about. So if you like this channel, go ahead and like it, subscribe to the channel, and share the channel. And also check out my previous videos. Until then, be safe. Peace.